planning of Lot 3, coming to the Cal in the afternoon, and the zoning there permits retail, general service, offices, restaurants, attached and detached dwellings, assembly, indoor recreation, entertainment facilities, and cottage industries. So the core zoning on Lot 3 is broad. And what that's enabled is a comprehensive planning process where the various components have come together: the health center, the fire hall, the parking, the potential housing project, and those will go forward together, enabled by broad zoning, the pre-zoning that took place. The other point about us only having a little tiny bit of land surrounding the works yard.
Tiny was the wrong word. I'll take that.
Yeah, take it back, because it really is the biggest chunk of land, and it's being retained as Area 3. It's being retained for future use. The other point is that in all of the discussion of this bylaw, the primary focus has been on Area 1, Lot 1. And we do seem to forget what some of the other enabling purposes were of putting through this rezoning. One was that we would have Area 2 pre-zoned for 20 units of attached housing. If we delay this, we're not going to have that area zoned for attached housing. I want to see that. I want to see the next council having something pre-zoned so that they can come in and they can, I hope, put out an expression of interest to see what can be done on that land. The other area that would be zoned as a result of passing this bylaw is Area 4. It's a little chunk of land. It's going to end up being zoned for single-family residential, and we can sell a bit of it, and we can sell it, and we can get some funds for some of our other community priorities. So I think it's really incumbent on this council to take a broader picture beyond some members of the community's objections to the light industrial potential use of Area 1. We've already responded to that by adding in residential as a use. Please don't forget that there are other parts of this lot, and they're going to be affected, in my view, positively by this rezoning.
Thank you. Melanie?
Yeah, so I provided quite a bit of comment throughout the process on this, so I think everybody's got that in mind. I did want to just start off with just sort of picking up on some really positive things that have come out of the discourse so far, and that has been the workshop that we've had, and also all the educational material that's been provided through the process. I think the public is now much more aware of where our public lands are, what they comprise of, so that's really accessible information, and I think that's been a really great thing from the process. So that I really love. In terms of supporting this, I can't, mainly I have issues with the light industrial zoning, and we've had plenty of feedback on that. I've also never been very comfortable with how all the areas have been divided up, so I can't really support that. And I've always had difficulties with the Area 4, selling it off, or, selling off ALR land for single dwelling residential. So these are the areas where I have some bit of discomfort. I think it set us up for future discussions we can bring back to the table and move on pretty quickly. So on that, unfortunately, can't support it.
Okay. Any more discussion?
Yeah. It's a very difficult decision because in principle, the majority of us want to get on and have this land zoned. There is no doubt about that. I see huge advantages. On the other side of the discussion, oh, and by the way, one should add, if nothing else, I think we've established the fact that we do need light industrial land. Wherever you might feel is the perfect place to have it, we know that. I think we know the answer to that. I think we've established the need for light industrial. The fact is, when we went out for a public hearing, the feedback, owing to the proximity of this land to the code, was hugely opposed to the light industrial element. I think if that had been removed, this would have been passed and we would have moved on and we'd get it done. So the question is, however many of us feel, is that we should just stand back, do not approve the light industrial being contained within this. Should come out, which means that the bill would then have to go for public hearing. I think I probably could say, and I hope my wording is correct, that there will probably be sufficient continuity, whoever the next council may be, to take this forward. And I do believe that when it comes forward again, without the light industrial, the public hearing should be a very straightforward issue, and then it's done correctly. First reading, second reading, public hearing, third reading, and fourth reading. It's a very compelling argument that if we hold public hearings, then we better listen. And I'm sorry, I have the greatest problem turning my back on everything that I've heard and read over the last couple of months, and that's why I find it very hard to support this motion.
I can just respond to that. We had 7 people at a public hearing on this major rezoning initiative of public land, and we had a total of 7 people show up at a public hearing. Had this been a controversial one, such as we had, say, with Cape Roger Curtis or something like that, you would have people lined up at microphones for hours. So to suggest that we had a lot of negative feedback based on the 7 people that came to express some and varying degrees of support and contradictory things where you shouldn't have residential. If you're going to do light industrial, do only that, was what one comment was, etc. So I think that really the community, called it lack of interest in a way, really means that there's not a lot.
And the community workshop that we held,
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
that
no,
was
but
significant.
But the whole thing with light industrial is, it's not something you support because you don't need it. It doesn't affect your life. You're not going to open up a little shop. It's of no value to you. You talk about housing. Everybody needs a house, right? Your value of your house, the location, everything. I mean, of course, there's huge interest in that. But if you take something as obscure as, well, where is somebody going to build his carpenter shop? How much interest are you going to generate in that thing? So, I mean, it's our job to do the stuff that doesn't generate a whole bunch of public interest, and the public will come and tell us in droves if we're making a mistake. And those droves were not there in this process. The big thing was, if there's no demand for this, what's the point? Okay, if there's no demand for this, it's also zoned for residential. If it turns out that the demand is for residential and not for this, people say, well, it would be ugly. Well, if you think it's going to be ugly, the council of the day doesn't have to approve an ugly thing. Right? But what it will do is get people coming forward saying, I'd like to open a business on Bowen Island. And then you do have also the possibility of a private property owner coming forward and saying, okay, I'd like you to rezone my land for light industrial so that this project can go ahead. But as it is now, all we're doing is saying, let's do what every council before us did. Let's kick another major item that was left at the very end of turn down the road, and the next council may or may not consider it any priority at all. And it could be 4 years, 8 years, 12 years, as it's been since this thing was first introduced in, what, 2006 or 2007 was the first plan for that lot. So I don't, anyway, I just wanted to respond to that. Michael, couldn't help myself.
No, go ahead, I'm glad you had a chance
So
to
I
vent.
have a question. Reading the land use bylaw amendment, nowhere is the word light industrial used. So what of the uses that are listed would you remove? Artisan industry, cottage industry, dwelling, general services, indoor entertainment facility, indoor recreation facility, live work unit, manufacturing, assembly, processing, and repair, including food and beverage products, machinery and tool repair and rental excluding motor vehicle repair, office, restaurant, retail use, storage, and warehousing. Which one of those would you remove?
Are you saying those are the conditions we've
Those
imposed?
are the
Those are-
permitted
those
uses
are all
in the
permitted
land
uses.
use bylaw.
That's,
So that's worth a discussion for 2 seconds, because I think Councillor Morse has raised an excellent point. Because the emotive part about light industrial, of course, is the word industrial. So the point the councillor has raised is one which, forgive me, I think is worth a discussion for a moment. Because, as I said, this is a difficult decision, and people like myself are talking to is responding to the wealth of input that we've had. And I wonder if I could trouble Alison just maybe to reiterate the point which she's made, which I think is a profound one. Would you, sorry Alison, at risk of being tedious, would you mind just, you're saying that light industrial
Is not used in the bylaw
is
anywhere.
not used in the bylaw. Well, okay, that's significant, and I appreciate your point. And therefore, the permitted uses are,
Artisan industry, which is allowed in Artisan Square, I believe, cottage industry, those things are allowed in most home occupations. General services, indoor entertainment facility, indoor recreation facility. Could see somebody putting in a small
yeah,
squash court or paddleboard court or something. Live work unit, those are up at Artisan Square. Manufacturing, assembling, processing and repair, including food and beverage products, so a ruddy kitchen. Machinery and tool repair and rental excluding motor vehicle repair, so somebody that repairs chainsaw blades and things like that, which people are doing in their homes right now. Office, restaurant, retail use, storage and warehousing. I think we've got a rezoning application.
I accept that as a, and I'm glad we've had, and I don't think we should rush this point because I think it's pivotal. And because my point was, are we listening to the people that raised the comments on light industrial? Now, to Councillor Morse's point, light industrial is not specifically mentioned, and the conditions imposed are the ones she just read out and did so twice.
Mhm.
So as a good argument, I just weighing this up in my mind myself, because if it's a good argument, we have to be in a position where we can accept it as being significant, especially as we really do need to move ahead. I'm not reluctantly, I do accept the Mayor's point that, we try at the end of a term really to have things in the best possible order for the subsequent council, whoever that might be. That's a point I take to heart as well. So
And I guess
I'm just mulling this really over now.
the other two things are maximum lot coverage, so your footprint can only be 35% of the lot, which is way smaller than a code house. And maximum floor space ratio is 0.7, so that's all your floor. And I guess, Daniel, do you have any idea what the floor area is of the mustard yellow building in Artisan Square, for example?
No, so the village forestry allow 1.6, and Artisan Square has a more complicated thing where it outlines four
Yeah, but I
areas
mean,
per
just
acre.
because,
Yeah,
to me, it's a number, but if somebody could say, well, that building down there
Yes.
is whatever 1,000 square meters is, then it puts it in perspective, that it could be a row house with a bunch of rental units in it. So, and it's too hilly for somebody to want to build that as a flat thing. Well, they can't do it.
Right.
Yeah.
The building, we restricted the size of the buildings on Area 1 to make them, I believe, similar in size. I'm trying to remember the size of the building I was in Artisan Square. They would possibly be 25%. The biggest that we would allow would be something like 25% bigger than the typical Artisan Square building. So they can be, well, again, theoretically.
Well, it's
but you have to
built
figure
down,
out
that
that.
one is on the topography, but if you look at the one on the other side, it's just 2 floors, but.
That's right,
I'm
because you can
trying
get, it depends on how high your ceilings are. It's not, no, but these are not buildings like buildings in Vancouver. These are not like a big industrial park.
No,
Yeah.
I remember this from the very first time when we were referring to this as flat iron, because, and I made a point of going to Whistler and driving around their, what they describe as Function Junction.
It's changed over.
It has
Sure
indeed,
has.
since I was there in,
Yeah.
lived there in 2006, whatever, 7, 8. And it so obviously serves a need, very differently to whatever is anticipated here. The only correlation is the need it serves and, as you say, the diversity it brings, and some of the on-Bowen industries, the small, tiny Bowen-sized industries it brings. And I'm really glad that this council, at least we can have these discussions, because I think the points raised are profound, and I take the point, to be honest, I really do.
Okay. So any further discussion before I call the question?
I guess the only thing I just want to, I mean, I was aware of all those uses, I just still feel that that's, the proximity to the school is just not appropriate. I think further down within the area, within Lot 1 would be fine, but I think refining the boundaries to be able to better accommodate those, I think we need the residential closer to the cove, and we move those other types down further towards the lake, where they're out of sight, and we don't have the traffic across from the school. So, again, I just feel that we're just not quite there with this rezoning. The elements are in place, but a little bit more refinement, so that's my comment on that.
Okay. So, let's get down to this one.
Yeah.
All those in favor?
Yeah, I'll take it.
Okay, we have 4 in favor. And those opposed? We have 3 opposed. Hey, that was fun. For me, not for some of you, I apologize for taking such a lead. Anyway, Emma, you're up, the Scarborough Road.
Thank you, Daniel.
Yes, thank you, Emma.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council.
You might well say good afternoon.
That one might sound expensive.
Yeah, I'll try and make this quick. Bringing back application DDP 04 2018 for council consideration. This is for the property at 1225 Scarborough Road in the Scarborough neighborhood on the east side of the island. And just to refresh everyone's memory, this is the second time this applicant has brought forward an application to reduce the front setback to 1.5 meters from 7.5. That's to enable the construction of a house. Since the introduction was brought to council in July, we have received an engineering review from the applicant. This was done by Alistair Engineering. And the review did show that the existing foundations were adequate in some spots, mainly the 2 top corners and the newly poured strip on the south side. However, there is several areas that are inadequate, including a number of footings, all of which will need to be replaced, as well as the deck. The entire deck was shown to be inadequate, and also the portion to enable the 1.5 meter setback will have to be removed. And this report was referred internally to the building department through discussions with the engineering building inspector. It was determined that to make the repairs and replacements to the foundation, the entire existing structure will have to be removed, including all framing, the entire flooring, and as mentioned, the entire deck.
Do we have a written report from the building inspector?
I have written comment.
They haven't been circulated.
Sorry?
They weren't circulated to us?
No, the internal comments are not normally circulated, but I can, if council is interested. The 2 written submissions we received, so far, actually there was a third, since this presentation was prepared. One was in support, and that was citing that the current structure is unsightly to the neighborhood, and they're supporting the application to enable the house to be constructed to respectable standards. The two submissions that were in opposition cited reasons of unlawful construction, that it was built without a permit, and that there is ample buildable area on the lot, and the current siting is a concern for visibility and traffic safety. And at this point, I also want to mention that the engineer and building inspector are both of the opinion that repair of the existing foundations to current standards and building code will be significantly more costly than a new build.
Sorry,
So,
could you just repeat that? Just your last sentence, would you mind? Sorry.
yes, the building inspector and the engineer are of the opinion that to make the repairs to the existing foundation, to bring it to code, will be significantly more costly than to build a new foundation.
Thank you, thank you.
Is that, I'm sorry, Emma, but I didn't read that from the engineer in his report.
Yes, those were subsequent verbal discussions. So going back to the initial application, the main reason provided by the applicant for asking for this variance is to enable upgrading of the old cabin structure. Given the information we now have, we understand that the entire structure will need to be removed. Secondary reasons provided were because of financial hardship, the amount invested already in the structure, and to be able to provide affordable housing. Again, with the information we have, we understand that the structure and foundation will need significant replacement and repairs, and will be more costly than building new. So for these reasons, being that there is siting on the property that would allow for the proposed development without encroaching on setbacks, and lack of financial hardship, staff is recommending rejection of this development variance permit application.
Could you put that sketch back up?
Is that it, then, Emma?
Yes.
Yeah, Gary first.
Yeah,
The one before that.
I more than anybody wanted to see this work. I thought it was, I didn't buy into the visibility things because there's a stop sign right there, and so he agreed to cut off the corner there and sort of move the shacks in the back and that sort of thing. And but the unfortunate part is the engineer's report is the death knell on this project
Why?
because of the cost.
Mm.
I can guarantee you that I know exactly what the engineer's gonna say, the total structure, well, maybe not the total structure, but probably 80 or 90% of the structure is gonna have to be replaced. There's absolutely no question, and I totally agree that it would be much financially more prudent to move it back and start over again. That's the end of the road. The engineer's report just, there's no way that you could make that work there with what he's gonna have to do to support that,
So I guess,
unfortunately.
Allison?
I'm trying to understand, if this foundation is largely sound, because of all the green things, I agree, you'd have to remove the structure if it's not sound, and obviously there apparently is correspondence that we don't have, that says that. But to me, building a whole new foundation is going to be expensive. You're gonna have to build a structure regardless, so the question is, if you move it, then you've gotta build a whole new foundation, and to me, it makes sense that one just is repairing or upgrading an existing foundation is going to be cheaper than building a whole new one.
No.
But that-
The old
okay.
foundation is crap.
Well, Jeff Allister's report says the northwest, northeast corners of the foundation, the east-west edge of the slab on grade, and the newly placed strip footings and foundations along the lower south edge of the home, complete with a short return to the north, are adequate and could be utilized to support proposed construction.
However,
But
So,
it's the rest of it.
but.
those footings are gonna have to be 6 foot square, so all the floor has to come up, there's no way you
No,
can get the
but-
footings into.
I'm not saying this, I'm saying if you've got an existing foundation that just needs some rehabbing versus pouring a whole new foundation, forget about the structure, which is more expensive. I guess, to me, you know,
The re,
patching the dress is cheaper than buying a whole
no,
new dress.
never is unfortunately.
Just a quick comment, I went out and looked at it as well, and looked down at, this is a very, very old building with very old concrete coming down through the middle of it.
I'm
By
not,
the time you take it down, take those trusses off, take all that framing off, take all the old walls out, and get down to where you can actually pour footings down the middle of that house, and then rip that down to hard pan, make it big enough to do it, forget about it. It's just do it somewhere else, right? Just move to a new spot, and bring your excavator in and get it done. Sorry, Emma?
I didn't mention this during the presentation, but the road, as Gary had mentioned, is quite a ways edge of pavement. It's quite a ways from the current property line. The Scarborough and Miller Road intersection is quite well used on Bowen, and the geometry does not meet safety standards currently, so it is identified as a future safety improvement for realignment. And when that project comes to be, it's very likely that we will have to take this road allowance and use it all the way to the property line.
Okay.
Thanks, Emma.
If no one else has comments, I'd like to wrap this up.
Just a quick question. I don't quite know how to put it. How did it get in this state? There was the stop work order that was issued. Why was it left exposed?
That's the choice made by the applicant.
Just seems tragic. On a couple
Yeah,
of levels.
like I said, it's a very hard decision to make and move it, but I don't think there's any option at this point.
I do take into account the future, that is, we all know about that corner, we don't need to have a discussion. I do take Emma's point, looking ahead as well as to what might have to happen if we need that land back to make that corner more visible, safe, whatever it is, we're thinking ahead, time to come. And it is a sad decision, because I think we all are looking for ways to help this person. I don't get it.
Yes, well,
I'm prepared to move the motion, mostly for safety in the long term. That council reject development variance permit DVP 04/2018 for the variance of front setback for 1225 Scarborough Road, legally described as that part of lot 23 lying to the west of a straight line bisecting the north and south boundaries of said lot, DL 1553, plan 1948, PID 191695.
okay, do I have a seconder? Seconded. Any discussion before I call the question? All those in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Thank you, Emma. Okay. Now we are on to the foot passenger sea shuttle.
Oh,
Councillor Fast.
okay. Well, cast your mind back to July, when there was a meeting of the Transportation Advisory Committee. And out of that meeting came this recommendation. And this was after Emma, who is our staff person liaising with the foot passenger. Yeah, well, that's okay. It's okay, because she wasn't there. My point is, she had left with the delegation that had come before about the on-demand bus variations and the pilot study. So, but she's seen it and didn't have anything to add. We had a subsequent email discussion, which I felt I wanted to put into a bit of a report so you could see why we moved this. And so, basically, it's to approach TransLink instead of always going after BC Ferries and being rebuffed. And this is the idea of the foot passenger. I put in the word sea shuttle service, just to differentiate it from a ferry. And the information is there. Foot passenger traffic is going up. Vehicles are being left behind. All kinds of plans, and our new transportation plan in particular supports this through alternative ferry support, alternative options, regional partnerships. There's a marine study. Ferry capacity may be limited during reconstruction of the Horseshoe Bay Terminal. The private sector service is no longer operating and people miss it, they were using it. And TransLink has years of experience operating marine transit and has a downtown docking facility. And so that's why I'm bringing this to council with a bit of a report, just to reflect all that input and thinking. And instead of having to do it verbally off the top of my head, which is what we usually do with council, with committee recommendations. So I just thought I would try something, knowing that it would be a gap from mid-July to now. Any questions?
Sure.
Well, totally want to see a passenger ferry from Bowen down to downtown Vancouver to the C-bus. But I've got a little problem with the wording. There was a marine study done in 2004. I didn't have time last night to go rooting around in my old laptop to find all this stuff. There was another update done in 2010 for the Olympics. And there was actually going to be a pilot run from Bowen to 14th and West Van to the C-bus terminal, and I think that was sometime maybe after 2004 and before 2010. Too many years to try and remember which one. And if we went to TransLink and said, TransLink, with a proposal what's the proposal? That they run a passenger-only service, or that they revisit and update their feasibility studies on running a transportation service? Because
This recommendation came from the Transportation Advisory
Yeah,
Committee to
so-
council. So it could be that our recommendation would be to direct staff to begin discussions with TransLink.
yeah, so that's, I guess, what I'm getting at, is I don't think we can pass this motion.
This
The
was
way
just,
it is,
this was
yeah.
a recommendation to council. What council decides to do is different.
Okay, and then the other issue is calling it a sea shuttle. Shuttle to me implies back and forth and frequent service, so I don't know that that's.
I'm happy to take those words out.
Yeah.
Let's take them out.
I guess the resolution that we would be passing is that council requests staff to start discussions with TransLink about updating their feasibility studies and looking into a passenger-only ferry service from Snug Cove to downtown Vancouver.
Can I just interject?
Or from Bowen Island to downtown Vancouver, let's leave it open. as to
So
where
there
we depart
is-
from.
TransLink as a major priority is looking at traffic to and from the North Shore. Because of the second Narrows Bridge problems, the decision has been made that no more lanes of traffic are going to flow from across Burrard Inlet. So the next crossing may be some sort of a SkyTrain type of thing on a rail line, although not the rail line that's there. But the bottom line is there's a huge group of people being put together who are looking at this, and certainly marine ferry
Options.
traffic, and also looking at beyond the region. So the next step with TransLink is, what about all this traffic coming in from Abbotsford, coming down from Squamish, coming in on the ferry? The fact that it's been siloed, where TransLink has just looked at the traffic that they're generating themselves, is no longer going to work, because the inadequacy of service to North Vancouver is largely because of all of the traffic going up to Whistler and so on, and the opening of the Duffy Lake Road, et cetera, et cetera. So they are looking at marine stuff. We're looking at a new 25-year vision on transportation, but the North Shore component is a separate process which has now begun. And I have an initial report if anybody wants it.
We've got it.
You-
Bronwyn Law sent it to all of us.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
So can I,
Yeah.
I think this is timely because I have read it, it's the in-step report. And I know we did send staff to participate in that, and they definitely tried to promote the idea of using our waterways more efficiently. However, I don't think we got a lot of traction. So in that report, it is on page 18 of the in-step report, and Bowen Law did send it. So we go down to the second part. Municipal partners expressed interest in exploring the idea of expanding the use of passenger ferries to provide more options for crossing Burritt Inlet, particularly in the event of incidents that preclude the use of the bridge. And then, sorry, at the top part, the study identified a number of key challenges, including high cost for fuel, development of suitable dock facilities, poor connections with existing transit service, and lack of compatible land use along the waterfront. So I think we still need to make the case. I don't think that we were able to make the case strongly enough. I also wanted to just highlight, we did approach the Minister of Transportation at UBCM this year on this, and I think we've got it on their radar, so I'm wondering whether or not to move this conversation forward, whether it needs to be a conversation between the province, BC Ferries and TransLink to try and make this more viable, or even possibly between also, I think we also need to do some stakeholder engagement with our current
Seymour Bay.
private operators as well, so, well, I think this is a great start,
Mhm.
and
I agree.
It's just to open the door and
Right.
recommending that the Transportation Committee, recognizing that the Transportation Committee hadn't seen that report yet, it hadn't been released yet.
yeah.
So we couldn't refer to it in our motion, we didn't have it. And, but I would like to hear what Tyler has got from Councillor Morris's motion, because I might just second it if I knew.
I'm just gonna add something else to it as Tyler's got it.
That council directs staff to start a discussion with TransLink about updating their feasibility study and looking to operating a passenger-only ferry from Bowen Island to downtown Vancouver.
So I'm wondering if we also need to, because that study reference having, because TransLink, Squamish I know has also been considering it. But maybe that's enough to open the door, and with the North Shore study, then they could deal with BC Transit and TransLink and Squamish. Or maybe we just